I'm Steve Vibronics, and this is the Life in Dub podcast, talking to people who live their lives in dub and reggae. Episode number 2. Welcome to the second Life in Dub podcast, a new series of in-depth interviews with people who've lived their lives in dub and reggae. Firstly, I really want to thank everyone personally for the amazing support you've given the first episode, where I interviewed Keety Roots. Thanks for the emails and messages. It's great to hear what you made of it, and really nice to hear such positive feedback about the podcast idea in general and about Keety's own unique story. So keep those messages coming in and let me know what you think about the podcast. You can subscribe to the show wherever you pick up your podcasts, whether that's Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and you can email me at vibronics@gmail.com and visit the website lifeindub.com. So what have I been up to? I've generally been getting ready for the new year, the new decade, 2020. I was lucky enough to finish off the last decade with a couple of weeks in Mexico for some shows with Alpha Stepper and Danai, as well as a load of recording for a new album project you'll be hearing much more about soon. Mexico has really become an important place for sound system dub and reggae over the last 10 years. So respect to Rutical Sessions and all the sound system crews over there making this happen. Anyone thinking about a trip to Mexico, I highly recommend it. It's an amazing country. The big project for 2020 is the new collaboration Vibronics meets Weeding Dub called Note for Note, Dub for Dub. We made some great tracks together in the old Dub Cupboard studio, and we're going to be releasing them, and we're going to be doing a whole load of live shows together. I'll be talking more about this over the coming weeks, and you can check Facebook and Instagram for more info. My guest this week is Nick Manasseh, truly a legendary figure in the UK reggae music scene since the 1980s. We sat down in his London studio and talked about his sound system days, the enduring influence of his Kiss FM radio show, and of course, about his music productions over the years. So, enough of me, let's get on with the interview. Well, I'll start that again. Welcome, Nick Manasseh. Welcome, Nick Manasseh, to the Life in Dub podcast.
Hello. How you doing?
Talking to people about their lives in dub and reggae. So we're here in West London? Are we in West London?
Yeah, we're in the middle of West London.
I just come from the east, you see, so I'm a bit like, a bit confused.
Underneath the Westway roundabout.
And we're in your studio. What do we call your studio?
The Yard.
The Yard, okay.
Yeah, if anybody ever comes here, they'll see why. We're in a kind of compound with mechanics and a couple of other little studios, clampers, all kinds. Yeah.
No, it's a kind of it's definitely a vibesy place. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But what I want to do, what I'm trying to do with the podcast with each guest is to ask them to. The first thing is to ask them about a song or a track that kind of changed their life. They listened to it, and after that, there was no going back. And it could be something that you listened to like last week or when you were a child, anything, but a track you heard, and after that, it kind of changed everything. So I don't know if you want to tell the people about a track like that.
Yeah. So there's definitely one that I would always say, which is that in the late 70s, and I would have been 10 or 11, is when Virgin Frontline really started putting out a lot of good music that wasn't just Bob Marley and the big bands. The Virgin was sort of signing, genuine roots stuff. And they put out an album with Iroy called Heart of a Lion. And the title track of that, Heart of a Lion, is still one of my absolute golden tracks for the sound, for Iroy's DJing. It's just an amazing tune. It's an amazing tune. It's amazing production. I mean, it's not. I now know that tune was not produced for Iroy. That Harry J had it's a Harry J production. Harry J had a bunch of rhythm tracks, and Iroy rode on them. But nevertheless, there's something about the sort of silky sound of those drums, and there's a sort of softness to Harry J productions that I really love. I often think that Harry J is one of my favourite sounding studios from that era. And I was very privileged to mix the last ever record last year that was recorded at Harry J studio. Sadly, but a great record.
Did you go to Jamaica to do that then?
No, I mixed it here, but it was recorded there. Yeah.
Nice. And so were you already a fan of reggae at that point, or did that kind of turn you on?
No, that kind of brought me in, and that was the period, let's say, of just before the sort of two-tone era. So I was getting sort of drawn into reggae by bands like The Clash and The Specials. Like a lot of people of my age would say that they kind of, you know, that people from a non-West Indian background, you know, might get drawn in that way. And the Iro record kind of came across as something like just completely like, what is this? What is he talking about? What is this voice that sounds like God? I mean, it's an incredible voice. And, you know, now I know more about the context of that record, and, you know, I understand more about the sort of, you know, the influences on people like Iroy coming from America might have been, and with the, you know, jazz poets and stuff and whatever. But I'm just saying, yeah, that record was just something totally off the scale. And then I would cite another one, actually, one more.
Well, you only allowed one, but sing. You're a special guy, Nick, just for you.
Well, the other one would be, we all knew the track Good Thing Going by Sugar Minott, but the 12-inch has a dub on the other side. And I always say that is the first dub record that I ever heard. And it stands up today, that dub. That is a great dub mix.
Because it was a big hit. It was on top of the pops and everything, wasn't it?
Yeah, massive. And totally outshines the Jackson's version, the Jackson 5 version. I mean, Good Thing Going is it's one of the ultimate UK reggae productions, actually. I mean, it's a fantastic record. But the dub mix is called Bad Things, and it is dangerous.
And you remember when that came out and when it was like a hit and stuff, do you?
I don't really remember when it came out. I just remember it was around, you know, a woman that I was hanging around with a lot at that time had the 12-inch, and I remember listening to it. I was 15 or 14 or 15. It's like, that was the first dub record that I heard.
So that was your kind of way into like reggae and dub, was kind of like...
sort of seeing the difference between the A side and the B side. It's like, okay.
Because obviously in that time, reggae was a really big thing as well.
It was, yeah. I mean, I think it's easy to think for people of my generation that, you know, we bought a lot of, you know, the white people from outside the traditional reggae community, the West Indian community, that we were the first ones to get into reggae. It's not true at all. There was a big reggae scene in the late 70s, and you know, lots of people from non-West Indian backgrounds were into reggae at that time. We used to go to shows, and you know, I remember my sister, the same one who had the Iroy album, she went to see Prince Farai at the Venue, which is a beautiful venue in Victoria. It's just called The Venue. She went to see Prince Farai in 1976, and she wasn't even particularly into it.
But I guess you had things like Frontline and obviously Island Records and stuff. Yeah. It's like they were marketing like sort of Jamaican music to like the sort of student and white music.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was
audience.
It was all about you know, getting records to cross over, which they achieved. You know, with like Dennis Brown, Money in My Pocket, Good Thing Going. Obviously the Bob Marley albums.
Yeah, Uptown Top Ranking.
Top Ranking, yeah. I remember hearing that in the shop and just not really understanding. You know, it's like I just didn't really know, you know, but it's like this amazing record, you know. So
growing up, did you grow up in London? Or?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So reggae was...
in Kingston, actually.
Well, there you go. Yeah. So reggae was around, I guess, and...
It was around, yeah. It was around, and there was a time... my mum died at the beginning of 78, and my dad moved us from the suburbs into central London, and that's when I began to just sort of hear reggae. Reggae was around, and I began, you know, that coincided with that whole, I sometimes call it the sort of two-tone summer of 79, and yeah, I remember sort of, you know, it was just around. You heard it coming, the skank coming out of places, and you know, being.
Well, there's a big thing in the Midlands, the two-tone, obviously Coventry, the Specials.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And in terms of like music, because you know, we're sitting here in your studio, and you're a renowned music producer, but a musician and a writer of music. So how did you get involved in like making music, and how did that all come about? And playing music, and like the earliest of start.
I'd always played an instrument from quite a young age. I think I was about 9 when I started learning flute at school, and I kind of stuck with it. You know, I did it for a few years. I even got as far as sort of, you know, doing my first grades exam or something like that, and I still play a bit of flute.
I'm sure I hear some on your records. Actually.
Yeah, so a lot of that would be me, yeah.
So you were learning that at school?
So I learned that at school, and I learned how to read a bit. But, you know, it's more that it just, you know, if you study music a bit, you just learn a bit about music. You sort of get, you know, you kind of get the hang of it. And then a couple of years later, I started learning classical guitar, taught the conventional way, like, you know, playing sort of, you know, sort of pieces, you know, sort of Bach pieces or whatever that you would play in a sort of traditional school lesson, sort of
holding it in that special way.
Yeah, it's all about the open strings when you learn like that. And then I remember my guitar teacher just casually showing me a bar chord. And he was like, "Look, you can just slide this up all the way." You know, it's like, "Oh, okay."
Now I can play any song.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously now I never play on the open strings at all. It's always, you know, on the bars. And so I learned a bit of guitar, and that's as far as it went with me with actual music teaching. I taught myself keyboards. And my sort of knowledge of chords is pretty good, you know, and I'd sort of understand a lot of the sort of, you know, the kind of theory of it, the sort of maths of it, kind of bit, not in a kind of analytical way, but I kind of understand it, you know, you kind of get it.
Well, I'd say there's like a musicality in the music you produce as well. It's not like, you know, one finger dub. It's obviously, you can hear that there's some playing going on.
Yeah.
Even if it's like digital stuff, you can still hear there's some playing, I think.
I get bored easily. I have to keep myself interested. And in a way, it's sort of, you know, one of my kind of, I don't know, it's a sort of, yeah, it's a mixed blessing. In a way, sometimes sort of like I'm just sort of not really capable of sort of, you know, doing sort of, you know, sometimes, especially in the sound system world, it's simple tunes work really well. But, you know, I do what I do. And, you know.
So in terms of playing reggae, so you were learning some guitar and flute and stuff, and how did you get into actually playing reggae? I mean, what was all that about?
What was all that about? Well, actually, in a funny kind of way, it was a sort of necessity because that we'd built a sound system and we'd been playing out for a year or something, and I wanted some dub plates, you know.
Okay, so let's just rewind that a little, because the sound system, because that's something else I wanted to talk to you about as well. And for some reason in my head, without doing any research and asking you about it, I always kind of thought maybe the sound system came later, but that came first.
No, the sound system came first. When it comes to actually what you're talking about, like hiring a studio and doing a couple of little productions and stuff, no, that came after the sound system, but only just after.
Okay.
I think I was always starting to be up for it. I was starting to sort of listen to tunes. I'd kind of, you know, in a different way. I'd bought myself a little melodica, and I was, you know, playing along to Augustus Pablo records and figuring out the chords. You know, probably actually that melodica helped me a lot with learning piano chords. And
that's why it was invented, I guess, wasn't it? As a way to have a keyboard.
Yeah. And then, I just started going, you know, there were a few mates of mine who had like little 4-track setups, cassette 4-track setups, and start doing a bit of that. And eventually, I kind of had an idea for a tune, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna book a bit of studio time. And I booked a like a little 16-track studio, and the guys in there were really cool, and they helped me a lot.
And that was your first time in a studio, would you say?
That was definitely my first time in a proper studio. Yeah, with you know, with a sort of live room and kind of, you know,
studio life isn't for everybody, obviously. And did that make any sort of connection with you, like going to the studio and seeing it all done, and the magic of the equipment and everything? Was that?
Yeah, it was. I remember it so vividly. Was I hooked right from the start? Yeah, I think I was, and I think. One thing I did, which is probably looking back is probably quite a good thing, is I didn't sort of, you know, twing around for years and years doing loads of tunes and not being happy with any of them. I did a couple of tunes and I worked those tunes, and they came out. They were released. And I've always had a sort of a bit of a I don't work on stuff if I'm not going to use it. It's all going to get used. But I do recognize in people a kind of thing of sort of, they've got a little collection of tunes, they work them and work them and work them. They're never quite happy.
Yeah, endlessly noodling and not quite, because it's never easy to know when something's finished. And I think, would you say that, like back in the days of renting a studio and stuff, it had to be finished, so that helped that process of finishing it?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's true, and I think the money thing helps with that as well. That you're paying studio time and quite a lot, and you're gonna use it. It's
and maybe paying someone who knows what they're doing as well, so you can get it done quickly.
I was doing that. I was paying. Yeah, there was a couple of Spanish guys that ran that studio. Actually, you know what? I should correct myself. Actually, the first time I probably rented studio time was actually at Jartubby's. Just before that, Cecil was in there. Who's a guy who used to do a lot of Tubby's music, and Joe from Abashanti. They were there, and then everything was sort of compatible. A lot of people using 1/2-inch 16 tracks, so you could take it from one studio to another, So one of the tunes that was from that session at Tubby's that got used.
So there was a plan. So when you started making these tunes and booking the studio, there was a plan that you wanted to get these out somehow, and there was a plan to somehow do something with them.
There was definitely a thing, so we're talking about kind of in the middle of the 80s, that there was a big sort of dub plate thing with sound systems. You had to have dubs, and people really responded to them as well. When you play out dubs, people sort of somehow know, or they did then. They did. It's probably a bit different now, because you can, that maybe there was something a bit less polished about those dubs, or whatever it was. People knew that it could pick up that you were playing the sort of special tune. And I remember taking one of those dubs to a little house party we were doing in Tottenham somewhere, and playing it, and it just went off, and I had to pull back that tune umpteen
This is
times.
one of your tunes?
Yeah, it was what became Seventh Seal, actually. There was a slower version of Seventh Seal, and it was that. And what happened was that I began to, with sort of like moving around different studios, I began to sort of, book a lot more studio time. And at the same time, Ray Cheddy, who used to represent Wackies in the UK, he had put out a slightly later version of Seventh Seal on his label, Mystic Red, and then me and my partner Scruff, who became Sound Iration, we were like, okay, we're going to do more stuff, and we're going to do an album for Ray. And in the end, when we were ready, Ray couldn't do it, so we ended up doing it with another label, which was run by Youth from Killing Joke and Alex from The Orb, and they put out the Sound Iration album, and that's it from there.
They were quite sort of heady days, I guess, of like this new kind of UK dub, UK reggae stuff that's like using a lot more technology, but it's got a connection to the kind of original Jamaican roots music. It was the very beginning of that scene, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I often, describe myself as the sort of beginning of the drum machine era. That I kind of, in a way, that's why I like doing a lot of live music now, because I'm coming from that sort of drum machine, the drum machine place. So I like.
You've had enough of drum machine.
Yes, exactly. It was a definite change. I think that a lot of the sort of UK dub music that had been coming out from before, let's say from Mad Professor and Shaka, was all live. It was a lot of it actually was my friend, the late great Elroy Bailey. Played bass on the first 10 Commandments dub album.
And like the Fasimbas and...
Fasimbas, a lot of London music, but it wasn't drum machine.
No.
It was live, and it had a very particular sound to it. And I suppose we just came along like kind of young kids do, and they just sort of do something different,
But it's interesting because it was new, because now, I still call it MIDI, you know, when the computer talks to the synthesizers and drum machines, and anybody who's listening who's not like massively technical, it's kind of the way that the computer controls everything was like, it's been like that for a long time, but in this period you're talking about, it was quite a new thing.
Yeah, it was very new. Yeah, it really was new. There was no memory. You know, God, I remember, you know, I worked through the whole of the 90s on an Atari that had 2 meg of memory. I mean, that's just, it seems crazy now, but it was very new, and, you know, people would go to amazing lengths to sort of customize their Oberheim drum machine, or, you know, whatever it was. It was, I mean, it was hybrid, you know, it wasn't digital. Actually, it was, you know, it was analog recording. We were all using tape and analog desks and stuff. The only bit that was digital was the way that the little sample in the drum machine was recorded. That was the only thing that was digital about.
Or maybe the synthesizer or something.
Or perhaps the sequencing, you know, and the synths. Well, you know, when I started, it was literally the DX7 was about to come out. That is actually not a digital keyboard. We used to use a piano sound off a thing called a Mirage, and that was digital.
Is that like Ensonic?
That's right. Yeah.
Just to show my geeky credentials here.
Yeah, it was a good piano sound actually. But so what was actually digital? But anyway, people call it digital. You know, the Jamaicans they call it digital.
Yeah, because you've got a drum machine and it's sequenced.
It might be keyboard bass as well. You know, but the keyboard bass would have been analog.
Yeah,
definitely,
for sure.
It always was. You know,
and so around this, I mean, at some point, you obviously got quite majorly stuck into the studio.
Yeah.
So how did this kind of transition happen in terms of like booking studios and then maybe realizing that this was an environment that you really like being in? Yeah,
and wanted to sort of be in control of my thing. So we had I happen to know it was the 8th of August, 88, it was 888, was when we cut Seventh Seal. So by the...
You weren't tempted by the 777 then?
Well, I wasn't around. I would have been 11 years old. So by a year later, in 1989, I'd got myself a little 4-track, this keyboard here, which is still my master keyboard, a D5, and I put a little analog keyboard down there, a JX3P, and that was it, and a pair of little Tannoy monitors. So I had a little 4-track setup. I used to just loved it. Yeah, just doing little tunes all the time, and you know that's where Dougie's first 3 Conscious Sounds records were all recorded on that 4-track.
But you say you love it, but it's not an environment that suits everybody. It's like certain people they fall in love with the studio, and would you say that's an environment that you really felt something for?
Yeah, to an extent. Although, you know, I know a bit about gear and whatever. I'm not that geeky in that sense. I think it's primarily for me, it is a musical thing. Without a doubt. I can get sort of a little bit sidetracked into the sort of geeky thing, or sort of getting enthusiastic about getting some little bit of kit or something, but it's not, you know, I'm not really a trained engineer in that way, you know, I've taught myself, so.
But your mixes of even the earlier stuff, because like my introduction to your music was buying things like Natural Roots Man and stuff, I guess like really early 90s, and even like Manasse meets Equalizer and stuff like that, and it always had like a real fidelity to it, your recordings and productions. And it kind of sounded to my ears that like maybe you really knew what you were doing, maybe more than other producers.
Nice one, Steve. Yeah, thanks, man. Wow. I mean, you know, I suppose everybody who's producing music to any kind of extent would like to think that they just have a sort of instinctive sense of this volume is right, that volume is wrong, that should be louder, you know, a kind of way in which they want to present something. And that is just, I don't know, who can account for that? That's just instinctive. You know, I know when I hear something that's sent to me, that's too loud. That should be a bit quieter.
Because not everybody does. That's obviously some sort of special skill that you have, and especially because a lot of people talk about the very technical side of mixing and producing, and I have to have this equipment and that equipment, and you seem to be talking more about understanding how the levels work, and
or just a sort of just an instinctive feeling of like that should be a bit louder, that shouldn't, but there's still bits that where we all go wrong, where we don't quite get it right, and I'm very aware of my own sort of shortcomings, where like I know when I can be tired. I know that when I'm tired, I'll start pulling things down. I'll start finding everything too loud. And, there's some tricks that you can do to get around that, one of which is the one that I most commonly use, which is to just listen to your stuff very quietly. Because if you're always blasting it, everything sounds too loud. If you can't hear something in the mix, turn the volume down really low, and then you'll be able to hear it, if it's in there. Another classic one is listening mono. So I've got my little mono speaker there, and I use that a lot. And there's a certain point actually where I'm aware that during mixing, especially when I'm on a sort of deadline, I've got to get something in, and that happens with me a lot because of the time differences in other countries, and I have to get the mix over to them by a certain time. Otherwise, I'm going to be drumming my fingers the next day waiting for feedback on the mix.
Yeah, it's like a different way of like examining it.
Yeah, balancing it tends to be easier in mono.
So with the studio, obviously you now set up a studio and producing things, and it's like, but I think of your music as being associated with like a number of labels, and Riz being the first one I came across. And were you involved? Was that your label?
It was 4 of us. So it was me, it was Gil, who does a lot of the productions for Tough Scout, and 2 non-musical partners, who's Eddie Joseph and his wife at the time, Mac. And it was the 4 of us that set up Riz. Mac and Eddie would, deal with all the sort of non-musical stuff, the, pressing records and kind of getting them out to distributors and stuff. And me and Gil would do most of the music, not all of it. That started off about 1990. Yeah,
because to say tunes like Natural Roots Man and did you do the Be Grateful as well with Danny Red?
Yes, I did, yeah.
And they seemed to at the time they seemed to be big tunes.
They were,
because you'd hear them in the dance, but you'd also hear them maybe in places that weren't, that would play a bit of reggae or whatever. They seemed to have a bit of a broader appeal.
Yeah. Natural Roots was the music side of it was me and Jeremy, the equalizer, and actually it was Jeremy who had the initial connection to Earl 16, who to my memory was like the first known Jamaican artist that I'd ever worked with, and we're still best of friends to this day.
Because I kind of because me and Earl have done a few shows, and I kind of half recut it,
right,
just to play in these shows, and then like just like 4 simple loops or whatever. And it's such a great rhythm that it's like I just got these first sounds called up on the system and put the drums down and everything, and it sounded great straight away. It's one of those rhythms that just works straight away with so few parts, and it just sounds great. And when you play it out, it completely rocks it as well, and it's just got that sort of magic quality to it.
I rebuilt it actually a little while ago, about 10 or 11 years ago, because I got sick of people asking me for it, and I didn't have it because I didn't have the multi-track anymore. And but I had all the original drum sounds sampled from that drum machine that did it. It's an Oberheim drum machine, and that became a 10-inch that Earl put out called Natural Roots Melody or something like that. It's a melodica cut. I really like that melodica cut actually. Earl really likes it. He said it's the first time that anyone had done an instrumental of one of his tunes.
And Be Grateful was around at similar kind of time, I guess, as well.
Bit later. So we started working with Danny Red, we being me and Peppy, used to have a record shop in Finsbury Park called Quaff Records, and then became Youth Sound. Pepe had a label called Dreadbeat, and there was another guy called Martin Watson, or Martin Mad Hatter, who used to be more around the soul scene. He used to work with Trevor Nelson and people like that. And we started working with Danny. We got a bit of money to do that from BMG Publishing, who had signed Danny's publishing.
Yeah, because I'm sure I remember some major label kind of stuff around.
Oh,
that,
yeah. No, so we did a record with that little bit of money from the publisher, an album, and yeah, Columbia signed it and put it out.
And Be Grateful was
Be Grateful was the big sort of roots tune from that, and Pepe had already put it out on a 12-inch, and actually it was that 12-inch, the sort of pre-release that, you know, kind of made it sort of bust on the root scene in a good way. And yeah, that's one of my sort of tunes I've been involved with, which is sort of well up over sort of 3 or 4 million on YouTube. Or whatever.
I'm sure. I mean, it's a big tune, and it's got that timeless. Yeah. And you recorded that in your studio?
Yeah.
Mixed it?
Yeah, we voiced it there. We did everything there. Yeah, we did it all in my studio in Brixton. Yeah. Backing vocals, guitar session, great guitar session actually by a guy called Dan Carey, who's now the famous producer who does all Kate Tempest and people like that. It's him who played the guitar on.
It was quite heady times, like the 90s, in terms of just sort of freshness of this music and the whole, I guess, side by side with like the dance music kind of revolution that was happening. And
well, I guess you could say, you know, that maybe it was the sort of freeing up of the sort of output of the musical industry, that it was freed up from major label controls. And perhaps you can say that in the early 80s and the 70s, if you could get a load of money together, you could go to a proper studio and you could record an album. But putting it out, pressing it, getting a pressing plant to deal with you in the first place is quite a different thing. I mean, I'm no expert on the history of the music industry, but I bet you can say that there's a lot, you know, that even just the word indie is a word that I associate with from the 80s onwards. You know, I don't think there are that many independent records that came out in the 60s and 70s.
Before that, the factories, the plants...
Just the majors had it sewn up.
The plants would have had direct...
They were probably owned by the majors.
Exactly,
I don't even know, but, you know, I'm guessing that Decca had their own plant and EMI had their own plant. I know EMI did. You know, and they controlled it. So maybe what happened in the 90s is that sort of made that kind of, that vibe of sort of, you know, we can do this, is a mixture of, well, not a bit of, what I'm saying is the sort of the kind of, the coming of kind of affordable studio technology that was good enough, you know, that you could release a record and it would sound good, it would play out well. All right, it might not sound like, you know, a George Michael tune or whatever, you know, as far as the sort of glitz goes, but
considering it's made on a budget of a fraction of it,
but it would be cool, and the people would respond to it, and in a way, you know, that sort of response from the people in a funny kind of way, you know, that becomes like the sort of motivating thing. Is like, your thing is working. It doesn't matter if it's in the charts or not. With our music, like when Shaka drops it, you know, everybody goes nuts. That's enough. I'm not even thinking about the national charts. It's just a different world. And so maybe you can say that that's what happened in the sort of late 80s and 90s, is that little underground music thing became really sort of validated.
Well, also around that time as well is the sound system as well, which I'm quite interested to talk about.
Our sound system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, because you even played in Leicester, didn't you?
We did. Yeah. We played against Tubbies in Leicester. Yeah.
How was any recollections of that dance?
Yes.
Please tell me.
Oh my God. Yeah. We did okay. I think we did better against Shaka, actually. Tubbies was sort of like taking no prisoners. It was a good dance.
Well, Leicester was like...
Tubbies sort of second home.
Exactly, that's it. And the whole hooligan posse in Leicester, and it was kind of... And I guess at the time as well,
he had that bass line that maybe, because this is a little bit before I was into it, you see, but I guess he had that bass line that maybe no one else had as well. And what was it like playing out in those days as well? Because it's like, you know, it's different period, different era.
What can I say about it? Well, I suppose, you know, if you look at it in a sort of wider context, you know, we came into that whole sort of sound system revolution kind of quite late, actually, that really, as far as, you know, that's a time from the sort of the end of the 70s onwards that, you know, that I always say, actually, the film Babylon captures it perfectly. You know, there was a need for sound systems. It wasn't a bit different nowadays. You know, a lot of people build sound systems nowadays sort of out of desire, almost. They just want a big sound system.
Yeah, they see people have it, and it's a bit like it's a big gadget to have.
But in those days, you know, the sound systems in clubs were just not. They, you know, there wasn't any choice. You know, if you wanted a big bass and you wanted to put on your own dances, and you didn't want to have to hire a club and stuff where you couldn't smoke weed or whatever, and you know, you wanted to go and play out in some hall somewhere, or you know, the famous warehouse parties of the 80s and 90s, you had to have a sound. You know, there's no getting around it. So some sounds might be more kind of like sort of proper gear. So I'm thinking of Joey J and his brother Norman. Their sound system was sort of proper made.
Was that the GT
sound? Yeah, it was like proper made bins. You know, it sort of sounded proper. Whereas ours was more like a sort of reggae sound, you know, with kind of homemade sort of style. But yeah, you had to, there's no getting around it. You know, you weren't going to hire a sound system off somebody. If you were, you know, well, you just weren't.
So that's what kind of inspired you to build a sound, was just that need then?
I think also there was desire. We just wanted one. We wanted to have a big sound system, and, you know, we were kind of on the hustling, you know, so we had some cash. But yeah, there was no choice.
And would you generally play other sounds? It was like you...
No, we would do a lot of house parties, a lot. Like a lot of reggae sounds then. And still to an extent now, you do a lot of house parties. Some we would to play some soul, some funk and stuff. It wasn't all heavy root sessions, not at all. And in fact, actually, it became like, you know, we just want to do some sessions where you can play like, you know, heavyweight style and not have to worry about, you know, so that the people will come for that. It took a little while to get there, actually, to get to that sort of dub place. And yeah, no, it wasn't all about playing sounds at all. No, we didn't really start playing sounds until, I remember it was probably about, 87, something like that. I can't really remember, but it might even have been that the first sound we played was Joe Warrior in Muswell Hill. It might have been. I might be wrong about that, but I kind of think it is that.
And how was it playing these other sounds back then as well? Because it's kind of, again, it's that different era, and I just wonder what kind of recollections you have of how it was, and especially, you know, maybe people who are listening who are,
it's kind of,
you weren't even born then.
It was and remains very much a confidence thing. You know, I think I was a bit of a young tearaway, you know, and I had like bundles of confidence, and it's like, yeah, man, I'm going to mash you up. And I kind of knew that we had the music to do it. And yeah, we had some great dances. I mean, really good. Even the first time we played Shaka, which was a bit scary, but you know, we got some response.
And this was in London, I'm guessing.
I was in London, in Hackney, yeah, and you know, Abashanti Joe and a lot of the Tubbies crew always says, you know, you guys did really well against Shaka. And actually, it wasn't that long after the second time that we played Shaka that actually Shaka stopped playing with other sounds.
I was going to say, because if we talk about it now, I think people who are listening who maybe weren't aware of how things were back then, is the idea of Shaka playing another sound is like, well, I didn't realise he did that, but that's how it was back then.
It's like, well, quite rightly. And in a way, you know, I sort of feel that now, you know, nowadays when people ask me to play a sound, that's like, I'm not going to do a dub plate clash with the sound because I don't have that. I don't put energy into it. You know, it's like if I did, then I would, but I don't. And I'm not really into the whole burial thing and the whole dub plate. You know, the sort of modern concept of a sort of the burial dub plate. It's sort of, you know, all that. It's not my thing. So, I don't mind doing it quite often. I do it, and I'll do it, like sort of 3 or 4 people, and we'll all. But I find artistically, actually, it's hard to get a vibe going to playing through, maximum 3 records and then having to stop. I want to play for like 2 hours.
But obviously, you had the sound then, and you were starting a studio. The studio continues, but the sound is no more. So
the sound. There was a story about that actually, which is that we were. So I always say to people who are building sound systems, there's 2 things that you've got to have that make having a sound system easy. One of them is a storage place that you own, and the other is a van that you own. If you have those 2 things, it's quite easy having a sound system. If you don't have them, it's a bit of a nightmare, or if you don't have at least one of them. But if you don't have either of them, having a sound is actually quite difficult. So in 96, our sound was being stored at the back of a place in King's Cross called Bagley's, where they used to do a lot of warehouse parties and a lot of club nights. And it was in the back of a sort of go-kart track that was in Bagley's. That's all been redeveloped now. And I turned up there one day because Raymond Judah had asked us to do University of Dub. And I went up there to pick up some amps to get them serviced, and we found that somebody had taken 6 out of 12 of the big bass cones, and they'd taken our wires bag. And we just took a decision at that point. It was like, you know what? Let's finish this. We're not massively enjoying it, and there was a thing that
it's expensive business.
It was expensive. It was a hassle. It was a lot of work, and also there was a thing then that it was the sort of height of the kind of Exterminator thing, and that so a lot of good roots music had started coming out of Jamaica that we loved. All that Sizzler stuff and Luciano and all that. Yeah, I love it. But the sound was quite subby, and it just didn't really work on our kind of sound system. It wasn't designed for sound system at all. Not really. Actually, what I would say to you is it was designed, maybe it is designed for sound systems, but it's designed for Jamaican sound systems. And Jamaican sound systems, by and large, are proper. They're proper gear. They're sort of, big... professionally made cabinets, really good equipment, American, Amcron, the sound system of Jamaica is a different thing. That whole thing about the sort of, the kind of the homemade sort of, slightly ragamuffin sound system, that's something that did exist in Jamaica really back in the day. But by the time I went to Jamaica in 1987, I was listening to Jack Ruby and Stereo One and sounds like that. Their sound was like amazing, fully professional, full range. There's no rasped up bass on that. They did not sound like Shaka, whereas we followed the Shaka tradition. But the Shaka thing was all about not playing really subby music. So those kind of Exterminator production, it didn't necessarily work that well.
Well, the sort of Shaka sound and the UK sound is that sort of weight and treble sound, isn't it? Whereas
it's a sort of middle bass.
Yeah.
It's not, it's a kind of, you're going to get techie about it. It's sort of like, it's all about sort of 90 to 110 hertz. And it's not really about sort of 60 and 70 hertz, because a lot of your, sort of, traditional scoop type bass bins can't really reproduce that well.
Because I remember hearing your sound, it must have been the sort of dying days of the sound or whatever, but it was maybe in Brixton in a,
you know what? You're right. It was. I know exactly where it was. In some private party somewhere. I remember you meet. I think the first time I met you.
That's right. Yeah. I think. I gave you not even. I wouldn't have even given you a CD because they didn't exist then. In terms of, I would have given you a cassette. Like I'm trying to make some
CDs
reggae.
Still did exist.
I'm sure I gave you a cassette.
I think I didn't have a CD player for the sound. That's probably more the reality. Yeah.
But that would have been, I guess, like mid-90s or something, and it's sort of towards the end of the running the sound. But you were out regularly playing, and
we sounded good. We sounded good in smaller venues. It was enough. Yeah, I remember it sounding. Yeah, it was really good. But there's just a certain point that you kind of can't go beyond, and you get in some really big dance halls. It's very echoey and stuff. It's actually it's difficult to play. I always used to like going to see Shaka in a club called Seven Ladies in Seven Sisters, sort of beginning of Finsbury Park, and it was quite small, and Shaka sounded wicked in there. I used to love it.
And I think it's hard to do the music production really full on and run a sound full on as well. Because if you're going to take it to that next level and really like be the big sound, then it's going to take over more of your time and energy, I think.
It was difficult for me, and we haven't talked about it yet, but it was quite tricky to be on Kiss FM and to be producing records and to have a sound system that people kind of check you for one thing. And the thing that people really checked us for was Kiss FM. And I, in a way, I sort of feel like my production thing took off more after we finished that.
Well, that's definitely like the next thing. It's quite a good segue into it, because that's the next thing I wanted to talk about was obviously you're producing music, you're running a sound system, but this Kiss FM thing was really a big thing. And my own personal experience of it is my good friend Mark, who, when we were young students, like sharing a house together with some crazy people and whatever, is for some reason he got these tapes of you playing on the radio. And back in those days, that's how people heard music, is like, especially people who were young and didn't have any money and couldn't buy the records and were living in places like Leicester where it's hard to get the music. These tapes would circulate. And we used to listen to the tapes over and over again, and it was just killer after killer. So there was something
like an early version of viral, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that was, and I was talking to someone the other day about it. I can't even remember where it was, but it's like, it was quite a legendary show. So I don't know if you want to talk a bit about that. And
well, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, me and Jeremy, the Equalizer, had been in Jamaica in January, February 1987, and we came back, and Joey J called me and said, "We want you to do you want to do a late night show on Kiss?" And that was it. Joey and Norman J brought us into Kiss FM.
And Kiss was still pirate then, was it?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a funny story actually. At the end of the very first show, me and Eddie from Manasse, who's sadly no longer with us, we're sort of 16 floors up in this tower block in Walthamstow. We just finished the show. 2 police cars. We look out the window and 2 police cars going wow, 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 sort of steaming into we could see them in the car park below us. And we're like, oh my God,
numbers up.
What is going on? And we're just freaking out. It's like we're gonna get flung into jail, Anyway, it turned out the police cars had come for something else. It was nothing to do with it. They didn't know the radio station was there. It was funny.
Well, people have gotten, because the current days of internet radio, whatever, people had no idea the lengths you used to have to go to broadcast music and
Yeah. Well, so it was a very privileged time to do radio. Well, to put it a different way, I think the whole of sort of mainstream radio history was a very privileged time to do radio up until the big expansion of the internet. That's what's changed it. So, I would say that, the Manasse on Kiss FM might have been particularly underground, but nevertheless, probably tapes of John Peel from the 60s were also pretty sought after and probably did the rounds as well. As that any radio was special, because if they were playing something on the radio that you didn't have it, one, it might either drive you nuts until you did have it, or, that was just it. You just couldn't get the music. Now, we'll grow up with a whole generation of kids who will, just think they can have anything. They can have it all, and they can, by and large.
But there were other people playing music on the radio around that time, but there seemed to be something special about that. I mean, did it feel...
There weren't that many, you know what, there weren't. Not on Roots. In Roots music, there weren't that many. I'm aware of like 1 or 2. There was Dub Bug, who was great on Station FM out of East London. There was a few, but not that many.
And have you had people still remind you to the day of like the legendary factor, the sort of status of your radio show and the passing of tapes?
God,
people still talk about it.
All the time. Yeah. All the time, I get emails all the time saying, "Yeah, there is this tune that you played on the radio, and can you tell me what this?" Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm very aware of it. I'm very aware of it. I'm proud of it. You know, I was talking to Buttons the other day, the famous trombone player. Yeah. You know, we were just talking about that thing. You know, like the way Roots is now, and you know, he was totally acknowledged, you know, in that little period there in the late 80s, early 90s, you know, not just us, but us and other people, we kept it alive. We kept the Roots thing alive.
It really helped me just to listen to like the consistency of the selection and kind of, and to hear all these rare tunes and kind of, it really helped me like really fall in love with Roots reggae. It was
also, I think, a big part of, you know, a lot of the producers reissuing their catalogues as well. So, you know, about, let's say, 3 years after we were on legal Kiss, you know, suddenly all the Yabba You catalogue was available again, all the Pablo catalogue was available again, on vinyl, on 7-inch, not bad quality, you know, stuff that you just could not, you know, it was like serious money tunes you could suddenly get again. Yeah, you know,
because I guess Kiss was quite because obviously I'm in Leicester, so we had our own pirate radio there.
Yeah, yeah.
And it, you know, it was a popular thing in Leicester, definitely. But we didn't have Kiss. But I'm guessing Kiss was quite a big thing here. It was like widely listened to.
It was because it was diverse. So for every, you know, in a funny kind of way, you could say that Kiss FM was a bit sort of schizophrenic, because on the one side there was sort of us and Joey J appealing to all the dub heads, but the main draw of Kiss was about Paul Anderson, who sadly died recently, and Norman J, and you know, the funk and soul thing that you know, and Kiss was massive for that. You know, had the good DJs. You know, really did on many different levels, on, you know, working right across the sort of the spectrum of the sort of audiences in London. You know, Kiss was absolutely killing it, but in many different areas.
So for you to get a show on such a sort of successful label, a station, but a station that had the cred as well, and like the people tuning in because they know they're going to listen to something kind of interesting, and I guess it's like the perfect time to be playing all these like Roots classics to people who.
Well, it was a good time, yeah. So the amount of people that sort of, you know, say to me, "Oh, I used to listen to your show. We used to come out of the clubs at 3:00 in the morning, put the radio on. There was Manasse on the, you know, put proper dub music, you know, da 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 da." Yeah, I think Gordon Mack, who ran Kiss, who's you know, likes his reggae, but he's not a you know, Roots person in that way. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying that. Had a great, you know, vision to keep us in there. You know, we sort of stuck out like sore thumbs in a way. You know,
it was a
sort of soul boys,
and it was a hardcore show. It wasn't like, oh, let's try and play something that people might understand or like. It's like you were playing like, you know, did the original Roots reggae, and I guess that is one of the sort of problems, if you like, of kind of reggae and dub is getting is people getting access to it, because it's not in the major media channels and stuff. For this time, Kiss is a big thing, and you're playing these kind of undiluted music show to people.
Well, there was definitely a thing with Kiss that I sort of, you know, when it went legal, you know, began to understand the sort of nuts and bolts of it and how it all worked, and so you could say that our show was the, you know, part of the beginning of what you would call specialist radio shows, which is now, you know, taken for granted, but actually that didn't exist before. So you know, you could say in the 80s that you could listen to Radio 1 all day and all night, and there would not be a themed radio show on there.
No, you're just getting the hits until John Peel comes along.
Or even album tracks or whatever, but not a themed radio show. Maybe on Radio 2, you might have had sort of, you know, hits from the movies or something, but there wasn't specialist shows in that way. And how it worked on Kiss was that up till 7 in the evening would be playlisted and would be sort of, you know, not mainstream, still soul music, it was black music. And then after 7 p.m. would be the specialist shows.
So sort of moving on to sort of other stuff that's sort of been happening, and kind of, you produced the music for the Roots Garden label.
Yeah.
And John at Roots Garden, he was one of the first people to ever book me to play a session outside of Leicester in the sort of late 90s. And it was really like a big event. And me and Richie Roots, who I set the Scoops label up with, we went down and played. And it was really like, we've got some records out and we've been booked and things are happening. And you're obviously involved in doing the music for the label, but it's put out some really great music. And I was wondering if you want to talk about that Roots Garden label at all.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's a nice link actually between Roots Garden and Riz, which is that just towards the end of Riz, we did a couple of tracks with Johnny Osborne, and we released one of them on Riz, and that's called Rise Up. And there was one that we hadn't released. It's called Black Star Liner, and that became the first tune on Roots Garden. And that's nice. And John knew about that tune. John had it on dub and was like, why don't we release that? And that became the first record on Roots Garden. I mean, Roots Garden's great. I love it. I talk about it a lot in interviews. John has a great, John who sort of runs the label side of it, has a great temperament and a great sort of head for running a Roots label. He does it really well.
And how does it operate in terms of you working together and deciding what to put out? And
I'm really running stuff by him. I really am. Like everything in production nowadays, the internet is quite crucial. So it's all about, sending out MP3s and, poor old John, sometimes I'll bombard him with sort of, like so-and-so rough mix 5, I've turned down the clav slightly away. It's like, yeah, sounds great. I need that. I need somebody to feed back off. I do, I need somebody is really important. I've always said that about whoever I'm doing music with. It doesn't matter whether they play anything or not, I'm going to really lean on them a lot. And it doesn't even matter. Now it doesn't even matter if they're there. I used to say it's the person on the sofa is just as important as me, but it doesn't matter where they are now, because it's all about, sending out an MP3 and getting feedback. And that is crucial.
Yeah, I think that's something a lot of people don't realise is they maybe see or hear, Nick Manasseh in the Manasse studio or whatever, producing these tunes and maybe doing it in like isolation. But it's just not like that, is it? Because there's a whole, even if the sort of solitary producer is playing music to people and getting feedback from people, and kind of that's a really important part of the process. And
it's really important. And even just a sort of little, G'ing you up. Somebody gets back to me and go, that's sounding wicked. You love that. You need that. It's really important.
The opposite as well, like that doesn't sound so good.
Yeah, well, that's not working. I preferred it before. Yeah, exactly. It's really important.
Because the old records that we love so much, there was a lot of people involved in those. You got producers, engineers, the band in the studio, the vocalists. There's quite a lot of sort of people who are maybe commenting and listening, and
that's true.
The sort of solo producer thing, there's a bit of a less of a connection
absolutely.
To that.
I mean, really, when if you're talking about 70s reggae, the most significant part of how it sounds is the original recording engineer from the original live session, because you're having to record everything onto 4 tracks. So it's drums on one track, bass on another track, music on another track, and then the last track for vocals. So once you've got a 4-track multi-track that's that submixed to that extent, all you can do is bring out the treble on the drums a little bit, or bring out the bass on the drums or whatever. You can't do that much. The sound is set. I remember being at King Tubby's and mixing for dub plates, mixing old Freedom Sounds multi-tracks. You put on those Freedom Sounds 4 tracks, they sound exactly like the record. There's not much, so it's all about the choices that the original engineer made. So, they're all at Harry J's or whatever, or Dynamics, and they are playing through a 16 or a 24 channel mixing desk, but all those channels are being routed to one of only 4 channels.
So that tape can then be sent to like Tubby's to be mixed or whatever.
But basically it's 4 track. even with 8-track, it starts to get a bit more like you've actually got separate instruments. You can do a radically different mix. One engineer will do a very, very different mix of an 8-track tape than another engineer will do. But 4-track, it's totally changed it. There's actually not that much you can do.
And you made the trip to Jamaica and went to King Tubby Studio. Is that right?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
And what was that like?
That was pretty bonkers. You know, that was not. So I was there with Jeremy, the Equalizer, and
what kind of year would this have been?
This is just before we came back and joined Kiss FM. It was like February 1987. So I would have been 21. It was not what we were looking to do. What we were looking for is to go and get unreleased mixes. When we got there, Tubby said to me, he said, it's a shame, you know, we didn't realise you were coming. We could have gone through the library. But that is not what happened. What they did, instead of getting any unreleased mixes, we just went there with a bunch of multi-tracks, a bunch of half-inch tapes, and they shoved me onto the mixing desk and go, there you go, mix your dub plates. Straight onto dub.
So, and these...
Not onto quarter-inch tape, we mixed straight into the dub cutter.
The head is cutting the lacquer as we speak.
Yeah.
And the multi-track tapes are, what are they?
Half-inch 4-track.
Yeah, no, but what's the music on them, though?
It's all the Freedom Sounds tunes.
So it's not your tunes, it's this...
No. The tapes.
And what a trip.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah.
And how long did you spend there?
A whole day.
And you were there with King Tubby?
Yeah.
And
he was in the office. He came in
but you met him
every now and then and told everybody to stop smoking in the studio.
And what was he like? I'm sure you've been asked 1,000 times, but what was he like?
Just lovely, very lovely, fatherly, father figure. Really nice, very nice person. Very friendly face. A lot of people in it's a sort of chicken and egg thing of like how do you get to become a sort of Tubby's like figure? Well, it's because you've got that welcoming character in the first place. You're not going to get there. If you're some sort of, screwy kind of, person who doesn't like people or whatever, you're not going to be in that position in the first place. It's sort of, I'm guessing that a lot of them are a bit like that. I don't really know. I don't know what Coxon's like as a person. I've never met him. I don't know what Duke Reid is like. I think Duke Reid was a fairly entertaining character. I don't really know, but all I know is that there is a sort of culture in Jamaica and everywhere really of like you get a person who people are kind of happy to gather around that person.
Yeah, I think you have to. I often think
Mark Iration has it a bit. I always say it to Mark. I love going out to Leeds and sort of seeing Mark, and he's got all his people around him. I think Mark has it a bit.
Yeah, I'm hoping to welcome Mark onto the podcast as well at some point. So
I hope you don't mind me saying that, Mark.
We've got a lot. No. We've got a lot of history.
Definitely.
Definitely.
As a compliment. It is meant as a compliment.
No. I'm sure he'll take that as a compliment. Well, it's not going to start wrapping things up now. Yeah. It's been very interesting talking to you about all this. And one of the things I'm asking all of my guests is like the Book of Dub. We're going to open the Book of Dub. We're going to write your name.
Yeah.
And what would you like to be written next to it in terms of what's if it's a overall contribution or a single thing, or is there something you think that's kind of what I've done or what I did or something I'd like to add under my name in the Book of Dub?
Skank sound. I like my skank sound.
The skank sound. Yeah. It's quite important, isn't it?
Yeah. I like layering up skank sounds, and I like it.
So Nick Manasseh, creator of some great skank sounds, of a great skank sound.
Yeah, I do like it. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
I often find it tricky. Sometimes people send me a tune to mix, and there's just like a piano, and it's like I want more. I want a guitar on there. I want something else. I love it when you've got maybe up to 4 instruments playing skank parts, all with little different offbeats and stuff like that. But together, they make one sound. And I'm always talking about that with bands and stuff, is that when it's right, the music becomes like one animal. It stops being a collection of separate instruments that you hear all separate. It just becomes like one animal, one thing.
Well, Nick, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Nice.
And onward and forward.
Forward, yeah, always forward.
Thanks for joining me for this second episode of the Life in Dub podcast. Please subscribe to the show wherever you pick up your podcasts, visit the website lifeindub.com, and feel free to email me at vibronics@gmail.com with any comments and suggestions for the show. I'll see you all again in 2 weeks for the next Life in Dub podcast.